Hello, greetings to everybody watching me at this time. Last time we talked about mongoose and we looked at a brief introduction to mongoose. If you are new to this channel, you can check out my last video when I talked about mongoose ODM, where we had a tutorial on how to actually save data to our Mongo database using the mongoose library or module. In this video, we are actually going to look at something similar but from a different point of view. In this video, we are going to see how to save data into Mongo database using Mongoose, but this time the data is going to be collected from a form field. And so in this tutorial, we are going to use Mongoose, we are going to use EJS, which stands for Embedded JavaScript, and we are going to use the MongoDB or the Mongo database GUI, which is MongoDB Compass. Now we are going to first of all create the EJS file. So move on to your views folder. Please take note, in this tutorial we are not going to cover EJS. We are simply going to work with Mongoose. So if you are new to EJS, consider looking for a course on EJS to learn more about EJS. Firstly, we are going to create an index.ejs file. Remember, when working with Express searches for the embedded JavaScript or the template engine from the views folder. And so move on to your views folder and create an index.ejs file. Before using EJS, if you don't have EJS installed, consider moving to your command line and run the command npm install EJS and press enter. Remember, you need an internet connection before it will be able to download this package from npm. But considering I already have the module, there is no need installing that. And we are equally going to use the NodeMon, which helps it easier running our app without needing to constantly type in node app. So in our EJS, in our index.ejs file, we are going to simply type a simple HTML code, head, where we are going to pass in the title. Let's say our title is Mongoose, and then we move on to our body. Let's consider putting everything at the center. Let's create a form. In this form, we are going to collect the data that we require, that needs to be saved in our Mongo database. The method is post. We are not really going to lay much emphasis on CSS, since this is not a tutorial on CSS. Let's create our first form field where the input type is text. let's set a placeholder which is input name. Next, let's add the next form field for our password. Let's add that after this div element. Label password. And at this point, let's add a placeholder and next let's add a submit button. And so I think that's all for our index.ejs file. So let's save. Now we are going to write our server code, and what our server code will actually do is it is going to get the data that will be filled in this form, that's the username and the password, and it's going to save that data into our database using Mongoose. So open your app.js file and let's start. Let's require the basic things we need to run our Express server. The file Express, sorry. Now let's require the Mongoose library. And so take note, if you haven't installed Mongoose yet, don't forget to do that by simply moving to your command line and typing the command npm install Mongoose and then hit enter. And so we equally require the Mongoose library. Now we are going to get body parser. Now you may be wondering what's the use of this what's the use of this module body parser. It's actually used to get the data, it is required to get the data from our HTML code in the EJS folder. Now let's require our template engine EJS. Now let's make it possible to actually create schema in our Mongoose, in our code, Mongoose schema. Now let's add our MongoDB local URL which doesn't change. And the name of our database now let's connect to our database using Mongoose, and this is done by mongoose.connect, where we pass in the URL and this option to avoid errors. I'll set this to true. Now let's set our default view engine to EJS, and this is done because there are several view engines that could be used with Node.js. We have Jade, we have Thunderbirds, but in this case we are using EJS. And we are giving our app the permission to use body parser. Now we are going to set this to true. Now let's create our schema. And actually, in the world of NoSQL database, a schema is actually an imitation of the database structure in our code. It is simply mimicking the database structure in our code, which makes it easier at the end of the day saving data into the database. Let's use the case of my schema, which is the name of our schema. And mind you, at this point anything can be used. You could use maybe a name or anything else as a variable name. In this case we have a username, which, as you can see, a schema is just like setting up the structure which data saved into the database should follow. And in this case we are going to use password as a string just for an example. And so that is our schema. And basically in Mongoose, each schema needs to be compiled to a model. And so let's use the variable name comments and compile this schema to a model using mongoose.model, which takes the name of the collection. So in this case, we are going to use the name article. I just love that name, article. And you should take note that with Mongoose and MongoDB, the name you pass in as a collection name is automatically being created in the database as a plural form, meaning article, which is passed in here as the collection name, will be created in Mongo database as articles. And finally we pass the name of the schema. Now we are going to create a post request, which is going to save everything to our database. Actually, at this stage, I am getting the data that will be input by the user from the form. You remember in our index.ejs file, we created two form fields, one for username and one for password, and we gave the name username under the username field and the name password under the password field. So by writing this code, we are actually getting the username from the username field and password from the password field using request.body.password and request.body.username, and we are saving that information or that data in info variable, which will be saved later on in MongoDB. Now I am creating an instance of the model. That is, you can see the role of the model. At this point, I am creating an instance of the model. So an instance of the model forms a document, and the document must actually match the structure that was set in the schema. For example, in our schema, it is written that username must be a string, and so if my username is a number, the information will not be saved in the database. So creating an instance of the model, we have var min, which could be anything else, new comments, and then we pass in info. Remember, info is the information that is gotten from the form fields. meaning an instance of the model takes as parameter the information to be saved, the document to be saved into the database. At this point, saving the data into MongoDB becomes very easy. We simply get the name of the variable of that instance dot save, and we pass in a function to check errors. So if there is an error, console.log error occurred. And so if there is no error, else console.log done. Okay, and after saving into our database, I would like our server to respond by sending done, and so we are going to perform that action using response.send and passing in done. Before checking if our code worked, let's ensure our server listens on port 3000. And if everything goes successfully, we should have a console.log listening on 3000. And so this is done. And so let's save and ensure you save your code, and let's see if it worked. And if it worked successfully, we are going to get a response after filling the form, and we are going to check in our database and see the information that was typed in. And so here we have listening on 3000, and so let's verify in our browser. Cannot get, meaning there was an error. Okay, we need to actually have a get request which will display the information, which will display the EJS, the index.ejs file. And so this is done using response.render index. Oops. Index. Now let's save and see our code. listening on 3000. Let's verify here. And finally we have that. Let's try it out. Let's type my name and my password. Let me hit save, and that is it. We have done as a response. So let's check our console, and on our console we equally have done. Now let's check our database and see if the data has actually been saved. MongoDB Compass, loading, and let's move to the classroom database and articles, and from there we have our username, Mr. Godwill. As you can see, there is an error on the code. You can see the password has not actually been saved. Can you pause the video and guess why? Here is the problem. There was an error typing in the name that was passed to our password field, and so it's actually password and not password with one S. So this is the right name that was passed in, and so the data was not actually saved due to that reason. And so after correcting, let us resave, let us delete the document in our database, and let's rerun the code again. Let's try it one more time. My password, done. And let's refresh our database. There was still an error. Okay, I get where the error is coming from. Let's restart our server. Let's restart our server. My name and password is text, and we have done. Let's refresh our database, and that is it. The recent try didn't actually work because the input into the password field did not match our schema. I tried putting text, which, remember, in our schema we precise that our password should be string, and so you can see the important role of Mongoose equally in validation. Thank you all for watching. Like and subscribe, comment and share. For more videos, you can always write to me, or anything you don't understand, you can always send me a feedback on this email address so that I will get back to you. Thank you.